Most young men don't fail because they have no goals. They fail because they don't follow through. And that sounds a bit harsh when you say it like that, but I don't mean it harshly. I mean it honestly. Because I think a lot of young men actually do want to improve their life. They do want to get fitter. They do want to sort their money out. They do want to build discipline. They do want to become stronger, calmer, more capable men. That part usually isn't the issue. The issue is that they start and then stop. Hi, I'm John. I'm a dad of two boys, and I spend a lot of time thinking about life. What matters, what doesn't, and how to give my boys the best chance of building a good future for themselves. And this is something I think about quite a lot. Because if you look at a lot of young men, the problem often isn't that they have no intention. It's that they don't stay with things long enough for those things to actually work. They start the gym. They start budgeting. They start reading. They start learning a skill. They start waking up earlier. They start eating better. And for a few days, sometimes even a couple of weeks, they're flying. And then something happens. Life gets busy. They get tired. They miss a day. The excitement drops off. And suddenly the whole thing starts to wobble. Then they stop. And that pattern repeats over and over again. And I think one of the reasons this happens is because a lot of young men confuse a strong start with real progress. But those are not the same thing. Starting is easy, really, or at least starting is easier than continuing. Starting feels exciting. It feels fresh. You get that little burst of motivation. You imagine the new version of yourself, the disciplined version, the fit version, the sorted version, the version who definitely gets up at 5 a.m. and probably folds his clothes properly. And that feels good. But following through? That's different. Following through is what happens when the novelty has gone, when it's no longer exciting, when you don't feel like doing it, when nobody is clapping for you, when you've had a bad day, when progress feels slow. That's the real test. And I think a lot of young men are not prepared for that bit. Not because they're weak, not because they're lazy, but because they expect improvement to feel more dramatic than it actually does. They expect motivation to carry them further than it does. And motivation is useful, but it's not dependable. That's the problem. Motivation is a bit like a mate who says he'll definitely help you move house, and then disappears when the sofa needs lifting. Nice when it turns up, not someone you want running the whole operation. If you want to follow through, you need something stronger than motivation. You need systems. You need habits. You need a plan that still works when you don't feel particularly inspired. And this is where I think a lot of young men go wrong. They try to change too much at once. That's a very common mistake. They decide they're going to go to the gym 6 days a week, eat perfectly, save loads of money, read every night, delete social media, wake up early, learn a language, drink only water, and become a completely different person by next Thursday. And it's admirable in a way, but it's also a bit ridiculous, because that sort of plan usually collapses under its own weight. Not because the goals are bad, but because the approach is unrealistic. You don't build a stronger life by trying to become a new man overnight. You build it by doing a few useful things consistently enough that they start becoming normal. That's the boring answer, which is usually the right one. And I think another reason young men struggle to follow through is because they make the mistake of treating one bad day like total failure. This is a huge one. They miss one workout. They overspend one weekend. They skip a study session. They eat badly for a day. And instead of thinking, all right, not ideal, let's get back on it tomorrow, they think, well, I've messed it up now. And then one missed day becomes 3, then a week. Then the whole thing is gone. That's not a discipline problem, really. That's a recovery problem. Because following through isn't about never going off track. It's about how quickly you return when you do. That matters so much. The people who actually make progress in life are not usually the ones who never wobble. They're the ones who don't turn a wobble into a collapse. They reset quickly. They don't add drama to it. They don't spend 3 days having an internal meeting about why they've let themselves down. They just get back to it. And that's a skill, a very useful one. Another thing that gets in the way is that some young men don't make things measurable enough. They say, I want to get better with money. Okay, but what does that mean? I want to get fitter. Fine, but how are you measuring that? I want to be more disciplined. Right, but what are you actually doing differently tomorrow? If the thing isn't clear, it's very hard to follow through on it, because you don't know whether you're doing well or not. You need something more concrete. Save 300 pounds this month. Walk 10,000 steps 5 days a week. Study for 45 minutes a day. Read 20 pages a night. Do your physio exercises 4 times a week. That's real. You can track that. And once you can track something, it becomes much easier to stay honest with yourself. Which brings me to another big point. You should write these things down. I know that sounds obvious, maybe even slightly boring, but there's a big difference between a vague idea in your head and a written commitment in front of you. A written plan feels real. A habit tracker helps. A notebook helps. A whiteboard helps. Your phone notes app helps. I don't really care what you use, just don't rely on memory and vague intentions. Because vague intentions are very good at disappearing the moment life gets inconvenient. And life does get inconvenient. That's another thing worth saying. Following through is hard partly because life rarely gives you a perfect run at anything. There will be busy weeks. There will be tired days. There will be setbacks, unexpected expenses, bad moods, illness, stress, low motivation, other people causing chaos. That's normal. So if your whole system only works when life is smooth, it's not a very good system. A better system is one that still works in less than ideal conditions. That might mean your minimum standard on a bad day is smaller. Maybe your ideal is a full workout, but your minimum is a walk. Maybe your ideal is an hour of study, but your minimum is 20 minutes. Maybe your ideal is saving 500 pounds, but this month you can only save 200 pounds. That still counts. That is still following through. Not perfectly, but honestly. And I think that honesty matters, because there's no point pretending you're making progress when you're not. But equally, there's no point throwing everything away just because it didn't happen exactly the way you planned. And I think what a lot of young men really need to understand is that consistency is more important than intensity. Intensity looks good for a few days. Consistency changes your life. That's the difference. Anyone can go hard for a week. Following through is what happens in week 4, week 10, month 6. That's when it starts meaning something. And this is where habits become so useful, because habits reduce friction. They stop every action from becoming a fresh argument with yourself. You don't want every good choice to feel like some dramatic internal negotiation. You want certain things to become normal. That's what habits do. They make the useful thing easier to repeat. And over time, that changes your identity a bit. You stop being someone who is trying to be disciplined. You become someone who does disciplined things as part of normal life. That's a big shift. And if my boys ever watch this one day, I hope they understand this early. Starting is good, but following through is what changes your life. Anyone can feel motivated for a weekend. Anyone can make a big plan. What matters is whether you can keep going when the feeling fades. Whether you can make things simple enough, clear enough, and realistic enough that you actually stick with them. And when you do slip, because you will sometimes, don't turn it into a disaster. Just reset. Get back on track, carry on. Because the real win in life is not being perfect. It's becoming someone who keeps returning to what matters, again and again. That's what builds confidence. That's what builds discipline. That's what builds a better future. All right, that's what I've been thinking about. I'll see you in the next one.